The sun was just beginning to peek over the ridge as Chase and I strapped on our backpacks, excitement bubbling between us. This was the hike we'd been planning for weeks, a challenging trail deep within the remote sections of the state park, far from the noise and crowds. The mountains with their rugged beauty and whispering trees called to us, promising adventure. Chase, ever the optimist, was already talking about the stars we'd see that night, how clear the sky would be without the interference of city lights. I nodded along, sharing his enthusiasm, but something in the back of my mind felt off. It was nothing I could put my finger on, just a slight unease that I quickly pushed aside. This was going to be a great weekend. We started the hike in high spirits, the trail winding through dense forests and along steep cliffs that offered breathtaking views. The crisp mountain air was invigorating, and we chatted easily about everything and nothing. Hours passed like minutes, and the trail began to narrow, becoming more challenging. It was during one of these quiet moments as we were pushing through a particularly thick patch of underbrush that I first saw him. Just a flash of movement out of the corner of my eye, a man with a wiry beard and unkempt hair standing still, half hidden behind a tree. He was gone the moment I looked directly at him. I shook my head, dismissing it as a trick of the light, but then I saw him again. This time Chase noticed my hesitation and asked what was wrong. I told him about the man and he shrugged it off at first. Probably just another hiker, he said, but I could hear the doubt creeping into his voice. As the hours dragged on, the man's presence became more unnerving. We kept seeing him, always at the edge of our vision, never close enough to confront. The unease I'd felt earlier was now a gnawing dread. Whoever this guy was, he wasn't just hiking the trail, he was following us. Dusk was beginning to settle over the forest when we finally decided to stop for the night. We chose a spot a little off the trail, a small clearing surrounded by towering pines. It felt secluded, safe even, despite the tension that had been growing between us. As we set up the tent and got a small fire going, Chase tried to lighten the mood. "Probably just a local," he said, poking at the fire. "Maybe he's hunting or something." "Yeah, maybe," I replied, though I didn't believe it. I kept glancing into the darkening woods, half expecting the bearded man to appear in the flickering firelight. Dinner was a quiet affair, the usual banter between us replaced by strained silence. We tried to shake it off, even laughing about how we were overreacting. But as night fully claimed the forest, that laughter died in our throats. The first sound woke me up. It was subtle, a branch snapping, a rustle in the leaves, but in the stillness of the night, it was deafening. I lay frozen, listening, my heart pounding in my chest. Then came another noise, closer this time, breathing, heavy, labored breathing. I nudged Chase awake and we both strained to hear. The fire had burned low, casting long shadows around the tent. The breathing grew louder, more deliberate. We dared not move, barely even breathing ourselves. I slowly unzipped the tent, just enough to peek outside. There he was. The man was standing at the edge of our campsite, his silhouette barely visible in the dim light. His eyes, though, they caught the light from the dying fire, gleaming, watching us. He didn't move, just stared, and it felt like his gaze was burning into me. Panic took over. "We need to go," I whispered, my voice trembling. Chase nodded, and we began to silently gather what little we could. But as we did, the man moved, stepping closer, his breath now audible, a low, rasping sound. We had no choice but to leave everything behind. We bolted from the tent, not caring about the noise we made anymore. The man let out a low, guttural chuckle that echoed through the trees as we stumbled onto the trail, our flashlights bouncing wildly in the darkness. We ran blindly through the woods, the path barely visible under the canopy of trees. The man's footsteps were behind us, deliberate and unhurried, but somehow always close. The trail seemed endless, the darkness thick and oppressive, but we couldn't stop. Finally, the trailhead appeared like a beacon in the night. We practically dove into the car, hands shaking as we fumbled with the keys. The engine roared to life and we tore out of the parking lot, gravel spraying beneath the tires. I looked back expecting to see him, but the man was gone. Back home, the silence was almost eerie. The suburban street was a world away from the forest, but my nerves were still frayed. Chase and I barely spoke as I dropped him off. I arrived at my place and locked the door behind me, every shadow seeming to stretch further than it should. But finally, I was safe. I could sleep. Lying in bed, exhaustion began to overtake me. I closed my eyes, the events of the day replaying in my mind. It was over. We'd escaped. But just as sleep was about to claim me, I felt it, a presence. My eyes snapped open and there, at the window, was the man. His face was pressed against the glass, his eyes locked on mine, a twisted smile curling his lips. The terror returned, more paralyzing than ever. Somehow he had followed me home, and now there was no escape.